David fired a shot that echoed across the Atlantic. The target, Goliath, is a foreign ammo empire that thought it had our cartridge market all sewn up. Can one local facility backed by real grit and built with faith in the American dream rattle the billion-dollar European monopoly that swallowed up federal Remington, CCI, and Speer? In this video, we'll talk about how Winchester's massive new ammo operation is taking control back from foreign boardrooms and putting it in the hands of American shooters. We'll cover the secret to Winchester's unexpected comeback, the technology going into next-generation 6.8mm military rounds, and how a second facility in Wisconsin quietly gave them an edge no one's talking about. This fight affects your ammo cans, regardless of whether you're a weekend shooter, a prepper, or a law enforcement armorer. Let's dive in. Picture David and Goliath in the ammo manufacturing arena. Goliath hails from Prague, always surrounded by charts that track everything from artillery shells to locomotive parts. That's Czechoslovak Group, freshly pumped up by the $1.9 billion purchase of Federal Remington, CCI, Speer, and others. After folding those cards into its deck, it brings in roughly $5.5 billion each year and clears more than $500 million in profit, giving executives the sort of cash they can redeploy into whatever the EU, NATO, or the next round of green regulations requests. Our David is from Missouri, an American company that makes chlorine, vinyls, epoxy, and yes, Winchester ammo. All run by Olin, a company with annual sales that top $6.5 billion. Yet, its net earnings hover just above $100 million, a fraction of the Czech rivals' haul. Revenue alone doesn't tell the full story, though. When a quarter of that revenue stream hinges on the Winchester ammo branch, every decision on primers or powder has an outsized effect on shooters at home. On the Czech ledger, sporting ammunition sinks into a larger ocean of armored vehicles, artillery barrels, and railcar refurbishments. That lopsided focus means CSG's top brass will chase the highest margin contracts, and the next big order of 155mm shells could shove civilian 9mm deliveries to the back of the queue. The numbers set the stage. Comparable top-line earnings, wildly different bottom-line power, and two entirely different sets of priorities. Americans saw the writing on the wall the moment CSG wired the money across the Atlantic. One firm would feed the United States from abroad when convenient, while the other would fight to keep production rooted on home soil, even when bean counters frowned. Years before anyone in Kansas City or Independence started pouring fresh concrete, Winchester's position looked anything but secure. Labor unrest in New Haven during the late 70s stopped assembly lines cold, costing tens of millions, right when Japanese and European sporting arms imports flooded the shelves. In 1989, the U.S. Repeating Arms Company, which then owned the iconic Winchester rifle trademarks, filed for bankruptcy protection. 17 years later, the factory that had rolled out Model 94 lever guns since Teddy Roosevelt's day shut its gates for good. Collectors snapped up the last Connecticut stamped rifles, and pundits published obituaries proclaiming the brand a relic. What kept Winchester from vanishing entirely was its ammunition side tucked under Olin's chemical umbrella. While rifles and shotguns bounced between licenses, the cartridge business dug in at East Alton, Oxford, and Lake City, quietly meeting military contracts and civilian demand through war, recession, and pandemic. Those scars forged a company that takes nothing for granted. Managers who survived the strike era treat every new line like a lifeline. Engineers pulled from shuttered plants know how fast a career can disappear if a project misses deadlines. That institutional memory keeps the new leadership cautious about over-promising and yet bold enough to seize rare opportunities. So when the Army announced plans for a next-generation 6.8mm cartridge, Winchester didn't simply retool an idle corner. It greenlit the most ambitious construction at Lake City since World War II and penciled in 21st century robotics from floor to ceiling. The very history that looked like weakness becomes grit in the gear's resilience that money can't buy, but shooters can rely on. The Lake City expansion rises from Missouri clay like a modern arsenal, not a museum retrofit. The footprint stretches 450,000 square feet, 10 acres under roof, crammed with temperature-stabilized propellant cells, inline X-ray gauges that pass every finished round through photon beams, and robotic case-forming towers capable of switching dies in minutes instead of hours. Hybrid brass-steel cases demand pressures rivaling Magnum rifle rounds. So the presses need precisely timed lubricant injections and sensors that watch for microcracks before they spread. Old-timers who once sweated beside rattling cams and punch presses stare wide-eyed at autonomous forklifts rolling between rows of palletized propellant without a single human driver. Even the foundations tell a story. Thickened pads sit under the annealing furnaces to isolate vibration, while an underground conduit farm keeps power and data cables away from stray powder grains. Contractors across the Kansas City metro cut purchase orders for stainless reactors, PLC cabinets, and air handling plenum boxes, seeding paychecks into neighborhoods that vote and shop locally. That spending ripples outward. Coffee shops extend hours, welding supply outfits hire apprentices, and area tech schools add robotics electives after hearing Lake City is looking for graduates who can troubleshoot vision systems. The new wing replaces the patchwork of legacy lines that once stamped 3.06, 308, and 556, but had reached their limits. Winchester has effectively created a clean slate just when it matters, because the 6.8M round the Army picked is no conventional cartridge. The new projectile weighs about 135 grains and screams out of a 16-inch barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second. Energy that approaches the old .270 Winchester while running in a compact carbine. Early trials show it chopping through plates that stop M85A1 green tips and retaining enough speed past 600 yards to rival Magnum hunting rounds. Recoil lands closer to a souped-up 5.56 than a battle rifle, thanks to sophisticated propellant curves, so shooters won't flinch away from rapid fire. The hybrid case uses a steel base married to a brass body, letting engineers push chamber pressures near 80,000 psi without the case head flow that wrecks bolt faces. Those metallurgy lessons trickle straight into civilian offerings. Imagine a .270 Winchester short magnum built with a steel ring insert for crackerjack accuracy at searing velocities, or a 6.5 Creedmoor load that holds single-digit extreme spreads across a 100-degree temperature swing. The same sensors that tune gas ports on the next-generation squad weapon rifle yield data Winchester can feed into hunting loads that stay mild in winter and zesty in desert heat. When racks of surplus training ammo finally reach the auction block, reloaders will scoop up once-fired brass that lasts twice as many cycles as traditional cases, anchoring a whole new cottage industry of load manuals, sizing dies, and specialty bullets. All that depends on the cartridges rolling reliably off domestic machinery rather than shipping containers queued in Rotterdam or Piraeus. If Lake City is the forward battery, Manitowoc, Wisconsin, serves as the supply depot feeding brass into the breach. Olin's $75 million purchase of Ammo Incorporated's gleaming facility up on the lakeshore barely registered in the mainstream press. Yet, insiders in the cartridge trade perked up. Manitowoc came online in 2022 with automated cup-drawing carousels, multi-impact case formers, and annealing ovens the size of railroad cars. Those machines can hammer out everything from 9mm to 300 blackout without shutting other plants down for die swaps. Lake City now runs around the clock on 6.8 for the Pentagon. East Alton and Oxford crank out bread-and-butter pistol fodder. Manitowoc handles boutique runs and R&D skunkworks types of projects. The result is schedule-breathing room. When marketing pitches a limited batch of 3840 for cowboy action fans, or a steel penetrator 357 SIG for highway patrol contracts, plant managers no longer grimace at the overtime budget. Production planners slot that job into Manitowoc, let the robots kick on, and keep the mainstream lines humming. Seasoned shooters start noticing new SKUs on store shelves, or perhaps the return of a caliber they assumed had vanished for good, because capacity exists to indulge niche segments without cannibalizing 9mm stock. That flexibility will matter the next time panic buying spikes or a hurricane shudders Gulf Coast chemical feedstocks. One plant can compensate for another, each with overlapping yet distinct strengths, all controlled by managers who sit in the same conference call, not scattered across 4 time zones and 2 regulatory continents. Meanwhile, CSG's newly minted ammo empire sits on enviable capacity, but faces pressure points money can't grease. Brussels mulls continent-wide lead restrictions that would outlaw traditional hunting projectiles and dump research costs onto every subsidiary. If regulators push for polymer or bismuth cores, CSG must either retool or risk losing tenders in its own backyard. Costly either way, artillery contracts balloon as Europe restocks for a long proxy standoff, siphoning brass cups, primer chemicals, and engineers away from rimfire and handgun lines. A single container ship blocked in the Suez Canal, a strike at Hamburg, or a rail snarl through the Alps can ripple delivery times by 90 days, leaving American retailers staring at empty pegboard while social media rumors ignite. When political winds shift, foreign banks that finance large defense conglomerates write environmental, social, and governance clauses into loan covenants, demanding emission targets or reduced civilian militarization. If trimming export shipments of 9mm helps the parent company hit a carbon metric, the rows of empty boxes will show up in U.S. sporting goods aisles long before newspaper headlines explain why. Winchester's advantage flows from simpler loyalties. The same Olin engineers who mix primer slurry for NATO also coach Little League Baseball in Illinois and pay property tax in Mississippi. They vote for county commissioners who range test their products, and they frown when their kid's FFA trapsuit team has to ration shells. Olin owns a chlor-alkali network that converts salt brine into base chemicals used in primers. So plant shutdowns in Europe cannot bring the line to a standstill. A vertical stack from raw chlorine to finished cartridge means fewer excuses if something goes sideways. Shareholders, mostly American pension funds and retail investors, care about dividends, but also about constitutional rights and hometown payrolls. That corporate culture doesn't immunize Winchester from mistakes. Yet, it grounds decisions in domestic politics, not overseas directives. Viewed through that lens, buying Winchester ammo becomes an act of self-preservation more than brand loyalty. Each box funds a supply chain under U.S. jurisdiction, reinforces local employment, and signals demand that justifies keeping the new machines running 3 shifts. The more units Lake City and Manitowoc push through, the easier it becomes for bean counters to greenlight fresh calibers, lower prices through economies of scale, and roll promotional rebates that encourage bulk purchases without resorting to panic hoarding. Shooters remember the barren shelves of 2020. They know steady buying habits keep inventory stable and suppliers confident. When a Midwestern sheriff's office compares bids for duty ammunition, they weigh not only cost and ballistic gel performance, but also which manufacturer is least likely to get throttled by an EU environmental edict nobody in Kansas voted on. That calculus bends procurement officers toward Winchester's domestic pipeline, and each signed contract becomes another brick in the wall of supply security. The bigger picture sprawls beyond ballistics. Ammo factories anchor communities, fund school programs through property taxes, and sponsor conservation groups that restore pheasant habitat and maintain public shooting ranges. That civic glue thins when ownership drifts offshore. Profits move to another continent, and facility managers can't promise how long the line will stay open if Brussels bumps the tax on lead by year's end. On the Czech balance sheet, a Missouri payroll is an expense. On the American one, it's an investment. The profit difference documented earlier underscores how much free cash CSG can redeploy. But the leaner margin at Winchester incentivizes operational discipline and customer focus. Rather than chase fashion-forward packaging or influencer-driven gimmicks, engineers pour resources into primer sensitivity curves, flash hole alignment, and propellant geometry that flattens. Velocity spreads. Shooters notice when cold bore zeros hold from July to January. That trust gains weight faster than ad impressions because it shows up on steel plates and butcher hooks. The best free market defense of the Second Amendment isn't a bumper sticker. It's a thriving plant with swing shift electricians who decide a background check expansion bill threatens their mortgage. They phone senators, they talk to union stewards, and the message travels faster than any viral meme. That grassroots energy evaporates when manufacturing migrates offshore. And that's it for this video. You'd think Winchester only did an upgrade, but nope. They launched a direct challenge to a foreign-controlled ammo empire while CSG drowns in profit and stupid EU regulations. Winchester is building with purpose, pushing innovation, and keeping production right here on U.S. soil. Between Lake City's high-tech line and Manitowoc's nimble brass plant, American shooters finally have a reason to feel hopeful again. So, what calibers do you want to see come out of this new ammo pipeline? Do you think domestic control will make a difference the next time demand surges? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like, share this with your range crew, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell icon for more. Thanks for watching.